You know what nobody talks about? The exhaustion that comes, not from doing too much, but from feeling too much. There is a particular kind of tired that empaths carry, and it does not live in the body the way regular tiredness does. It lives somewhere deeper, somewhere behind the eyes, in the chest, in that hollow, quiet place you retreat to after you have spent an entire day holding space for everyone around you, and then come home to an empty emotional tank and a mind that will not stop replaying every conversation, every facial expression, every moment where you wonder if you said the wrong thing, or gave enough, or maybe gave too much. That kind of tired does not go away with sleep. And if you are nodding right now, if something in you just recognized itself in those words, then this episode is for you. Stay with me, because what I am about to share might be the most important thing you hear all year. Let's start with something that might sting just a little. The reason good-hearted empaths keep getting hurt is not because the world is cruel, although sometimes it is. It is not because they are unlucky in love or friendship, although it can feel that way. The real reason is something far more internal, far more hidden, and honestly, far more hopeful. Because if the problem lives inside you, then so does the solution. But we will get there. First, let us talk about who you actually are. You are someone who walks into a room and immediately reads the emotional weather of everyone in it. You notice the person in the corner who is smiling with their mouth, but not their eyes. You feel the tension between two people before a single word of conflict has been spoken. You absorb the energy of spaces, of conversations, of phone calls, of text messages that seem fine on the surface, but carry something underneath that only you seem to pick up on. You were probably the child who cried at commercials, who felt responsible for your parents' moods, who became the unofficial emotional caretaker of your family before you were old enough to understand what that even meant. You learned very early that love looked like sacrifice, that being good meant being available, that your worth was tied to how well you could make other people feel okay. And here is where it gets interesting, because that is not a character flaw. That is a learned survival strategy. At some point in your life, probably very early, your nervous system figured out that the safest way to exist was to tune into other people's needs, to anticipate, to accommodate, to soften yourself so that others around you would stay regulated, stay calm, stay present. You became an emotional translator, an invisible support beam, a safe harbor for everyone who needed one. And because you were so good at it, people kept coming, and you kept giving. And the pattern calcified into identity. Now you are an adult, walking around with this extraordinary gift of sensitivity, and you are bewildered by how often it leaves you hurting. You give generously and get crumbs in return. You love deeply and attract people who love you conveniently. You forgive quickly, sometimes so quickly that the person who hurt you barely registers that anything happened, while you lie awake at 3 a.m. dissecting the entire interaction, looking for what you did wrong. Because you always assume it was something you did wrong. That right there, that is one of the core wounds. The belief that if someone treats you badly, it must be because you were not enough, or you were too much, or you did not communicate clearly, or you should have known better. Empaths are master self-blamers, not because they are weak, but because their entire operating system is oriented toward the inside. They process everything through the lens of personal responsibility, which is beautiful in theory and devastating in practice, because not everything is your fault. Some people are just not equipped to love you the way you deserve. And your beautiful, generous heart keeps trying to explain that away, keeps trying to give them another chance to rise to the occasion, keeps waiting for them to become the person you can see they have the potential to be. You love people for who they could be, not always for who they are showing you they are right now. And that is one of the most quietly heartbreaking things about being an empath. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine someone in your life, maybe a friend, maybe a partner, maybe a family member, who consistently takes more than they give. They call when they are in crisis and you always pick up. You rearrange your schedule, your emotions, your energy to show up for them. And you do it gladly, because that is who you are. But when you are struggling, when you need someone to sit with you in the dark, they are suddenly busy. Or they redirect the conversation back to themselves. Or they offer advice when you needed presence. Or they minimize what you are feeling because they genuinely do not have the capacity to hold it. And you notice this. Some quiet part of you registers the imbalance. But then another part of you, the part that was trained to make excuses for the people you love, whispers something like, "They are going through a lot right now," or "They show love differently," or "Maybe I am asking for too much." And so you shrink the ask. You need less. You present yourself as fine. You become skilled at performing okay, because it is easier than watching someone fumble through caring for you and coming away feeling more alone than before you asked. This is the cycle, and it is not your fault that you fell into it, but it is your responsibility to recognize it and choose differently. Here is a psychological truth that might reframe everything. There is something called the fawn response. Most people have heard of fight, flight, and freeze as trauma responses. But fawn is the one that affects empaths most deeply and most quietly. Fawning is when your nervous system learns that the safest way to handle threat or conflict or emotional overwhelm is to appease, to please, to make yourself agreeable, to prioritize the comfort of the other person above your own internal truth. It looks like selflessness from the outside. From the inside, it feels like love. But at its root, it is a protective mechanism. It is your nervous system saying, if I can just keep this person calm, if I can just be what they need, then I will be safe. When you understand this, so much of your history starts to make sense. The relationships where you contorted yourself to fit someone else's needs. The friendships where you always initiated, always adjusted, always took up less space so the other person could take up more. The times you said yes when every cell in your body was screaming no, because saying no felt dangerous, felt selfish, felt like it might cost you the relationship. Fawning is not a weakness. It was once a form of intelligence. But you are not a child anymore, and the people in your life now are not the ones who first taught you it was necessary. And yet your nervous system has not gotten the memo. The cost of chronic fawning is enormous. When you habitually suppress your own needs, your own voice, your own boundaries in service of keeping peace and keeping people close, you send yourself a message over and over again. The message is this: my needs are not as important as other people's needs. My comfort matters less. My boundaries are negotiable. My pain is something I should manage quietly so I do not burden anyone. Over time, that message becomes a belief, and that belief becomes the invisible architecture of every relationship you build. You unconsciously seek out dynamics that confirm what you believe about yourself, which is why so many empaths find themselves in relationships with narcissists, with emotionally unavailable people, with chronic takers, with people who are wonderful in some ways, but fundamentally unable to reciprocate the depth of care that empaths naturally offer. It is not because empaths are broken. It is because they are operating from a blueprint that was written in their earliest years, a blueprint that equates love with sacrifice, worth with service, belonging with self-erasure. And now here comes the part where I need you to really listen, because I am about to say something that might make you uncomfortable, and I want you to let it land before you push it away. You have been complicit in your own hurt. I say that with every ounce of love I have for this audience, because I know how much it costs to hear that. But here is the thing. If I let you leave this conversation still believing that you are purely a victim of other people's bad behavior, I have done you a disservice. Yes, some people have treated you poorly. Yes, there are people in this world who will see your openness as an opportunity, and your kindness as a resource to be extracted. That is real, and it is true, and it is not okay. But you have also, in your own way, participated in the patterns that keep hurting you. You stayed when you knew you should leave. You gave when you were already empty. You forgave without requiring change. You communicated your hurt softly, then accepted the non-apology, then told yourself it was enough. You taught people what they could do to you by accepting what you said you would not. This is not blame. This is the most important distinction I will make in this entire episode. Blame says you deserved what happened to you. Accountability says you have the power to change what happens next. And you do. You absolutely do. So let us talk about what actually needs to shift, because it is not about becoming harder or more closed off or less loving. The world needs your love. You need your love. The goal is not to become someone who cares less. The goal is to become someone who cares for themselves as fiercely as they care for others. Here is the first thing. You have to get honest about what you are actually feeling in real time, not 3 days later when you are journaling about it, not 2 weeks later when the resentment has built to a boil. Right now, in the moment. Empaths often have a strange relationship with their own emotions despite feeling them so deeply. You can feel the emotions of an entire room while simultaneously being disconnected from what you yourself need and want. You have been so practiced at tuning outward that tuning inward feels almost foreign. So practice it. Start small. Before you respond to anyone else's need, ask yourself, what do I actually feel right now? What do I actually need? Not what should I feel, not what would be the kind thing to do, but what is actually true for me in this moment. The second thing, you have to let people sit with their own discomfort. This is a hard one because your instinct when someone you love is uncomfortable is to immediately move toward them and do something about it. But not every discomfort is yours to fix. Not every silence is yours to fill. Not every problem is yours to solve. When you rush in to rescue people from their own feelings, you actually rob them of the opportunity to develop their own capacity to handle life. And you also, quietly, exhaust yourself in the process. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold space without stepping in. Let them feel what they feel. Trust that they can handle it. Because they probably can. They have just learned that they do not have to when you are around. The third thing, and this one is going to feel like a revelation once you start to practice it. You have to allow the relationship to exist as it actually is, not as you imagine it could be. Empaths are extraordinarily good at seeing potential. You can look at a person who is emotionally shut down and see the warm, open, vulnerable human underneath all those walls. And you fall in love with that vision. And you stay because you believe if you just love them well enough, they will become it. But people are not projects. And your love is not a renovation plan. People change when they want to change, when they are ready, when something in their own life moves them toward it. Not because someone else's love was patient enough, or generous enough, or perfectly calibrated enough to coax it out of them. When you stay in a dynamic waiting for someone to become their potential, you are not in a relationship with a person. You are in a relationship with a possibility. And possibilities do not hold you when you cry. Possibilities do not show up for you. Possibilities cannot give you what you need because they are not real yet. Let me say something about your sensitivity that I really want you to sit with. Your empathy is not the problem. I need you to hear that clearly because somewhere along the way, a lot of sensitive people internalize the message that they feel too much, that they care too much, that they should toughen up or build walls or stop being so affected by everything. And that message is wrong. Your sensitivity is not a design flaw. It is one of the most profound gifts a human being can carry. The world is genuinely better for having people in it who feel deeply, who notice what others miss, who care with such completeness. The problem is never the empathy itself. The problem is the lack of boundaries around it. The problem is empathy without self-respect, sensitivity without discernment, love without limits. A river without banks is just a flood. It does not nourish anything, it overwhelms everything. Your love needs banks, not walls, banks. There is a difference. Walls keep everyone out. Banks direct the water, give it shape and purpose, allow it to flow to where it actually gives life. That is what healthy boundaries are for someone like you. They are not about closing down. They are about directing your extraordinary capacity for love toward people and situations that can actually receive it, hold it, and return it. And here's something I want you to think about, something a little provocative. Have you ever considered that constantly overgiving might actually be a way of avoiding something? When you are always in the giving role, you never have to be vulnerable in the receiving role. You never have to sit with the uncertainty of needing someone and not knowing if they will show up. You never have to risk that particular flavor of rejection, the one where you ask for something and they say no. Or worse, they say yes, but do it with such reluctance or resentment that you wish you had never asked. Giving is actually safer than receiving, for you. It keeps you in control. It keeps you needed. It keeps you from having to face the terrifying question of whether someone would choose to stay if you were not constantly providing something. Let that sit for a moment. Because if any part of that resonated, then what looks like selflessness from the outside might have a layer of self-protection underneath it. Not because you are dishonest, but because this pattern runs so deep that even you might not have seen it clearly before now. And that is okay. That is what awareness is for. Now I want to talk about the people in your life who have hurt you, and I want to do it in a way that might surprise you. Some of them knew exactly what they were doing. They recognized your kindness as something they could use, and they used it with full awareness, and that is on them. But some of them, maybe more of them than you realize, simply did what people do when no one holds them to a higher standard. They took what was offered. They got comfortable in the dynamic you both established. They did not have to grow or reciprocate or show up differently because you never required them to. Not out of cruelty, but out of ordinary human laziness and the path of least resistance. This does not excuse them, but it reframes them. Not as villains, but as people who rose, or failed to rise, to exactly the level that the relationship allowed. And you were a co-architect of what that level was. This is where the real healing begins. Not in finding better people, although that matters. It begins in becoming someone who shows up differently in every relationship, who communicates needs directly, rather than hoping they will be intuited, who allows discomfort to exist in a relationship, rather than immediately smoothing it over, who can say, "This is not working for me," without first catastrophizing about what that conversation will cost. It begins in trusting yourself enough to know that if a relationship cannot survive your honesty, it was not a relationship that was serving you anyway. You deserve to be chosen, not just needed. You deserve to be someone's first thought, not their last resort. You deserve relationships where the care flows in both directions, not because you demanded it, but because the other person genuinely wants to give it. You deserve to take up space, to have moods, to be imperfect, to have bad days where you are not generous or patient or emotionally available, and to be met with understanding rather than disappointment. You deserve a love that does not require you to disappear into it. But here is the thing, and I mean this with everything I have. You will not find that love. You will not build those relationships until you believe at a cellular level that you are worth that. Not worth it because of what you do for people. Not worth it because of how much you give, or how present you are, or how well you hold space. Worth it simply because you exist. Because you are a full human being with an interior life that matters. Because your needs are not inconveniences. Because your pain is not a burden. Because you are allowed to be someone who is loved without also being someone who is endlessly useful. And I know that belief feels far away for a lot of you. I know that when I say, you deserve love without conditions, something in you agrees intellectually, but some older, quieter part of you is not sure it is really true for someone like you. That older part is the one that still needs tending. That is the wound underneath all the other wounds. The belief that you have to earn love, that it will not just come to you freely, that you have to justify your place in someone's life by being indispensable. That belief was installed in you when you were too young to argue with it, but you are not too young anymore. And you can, gently and persistently, begin to rewrite it. Not by overhauling who you are, not by hardening yourself or walking away from your sensitivity, but by adding to it, by adding the piece that was always missing, which is the same fierce love and advocacy that you offer everyone else, offered now to yourself. Start small if you have to. The next time you feel your needs rising up, but your instinct is to push them down and focus on someone else, just pause. Just notice. Just ask, what would I tell my best friend to do right now? And then do that. For you. Because you are someone worth that counsel. You are someone worth that care. You are not the exception to your own wisdom. Here is where I want to leave you, and I want you to carry this with you after the audio ends. Your heart is not the problem. It never was. The world has always needed people like you. People who feel deeply, who love loudly and quietly and completely, who make others feel seen and held and understood. That gift is real, and it is rare, and it is yours. But a gift that is given without discernment becomes a wound. and you have worn that wound long enough. The good news, the genuinely beautiful news, is that the very same sensitivity that has caused you so much pain is also your greatest compass. You can feel when something is off. You can feel when a relationship is draining rather than restoring you. You have always known, somewhere in your body, when you were giving from abundance and when you were giving from a place of fear or obligation or a desperate hope that it would finally be enough to make someone stay. You have always known. You just have not always listened. Start listening. That knowing voice inside you, the one that sometimes gets drowned out by all the other voices you are busy attending to, that voice is not selfish. It is sacred. It is the part of you that knows your own worth, even when the rest of you is still catching up to it. You are allowed to be loved gently. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to stop carrying what was never yours to carry. You are allowed to be, not just the person who shows up for everyone else, but the person who finally, tenderly, without apology, shows up for yourself. And the moment you start doing that, really doing that, you will notice something shift. Not just in how you feel about yourself, but in who shows up in your life. Because when you stop outsourcing your worth to other people's responses, when you stop measuring your value by how much you can give, when you begin to hold yourself with the same reverence you have always held others, you will stop attracting people who need you to stay small. You will stop tolerating dynamics that cost you your peace. And slowly, steadily, you will begin to build the kind of relationships and the kind of inner life that your big, beautiful heart has always deserved. This is not the end of your sensitivity. This is the beginning of its full power.